The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Academy training grounds as Sarah Martinez adjusted her backpack and walked toward the imposing brick buildings. At 22, she looked younger than most of the other recruits, her petite frame and quiet demeanor making her appear almost fragile among the sea of confident cadets. She had deliberately chosen to blend in, keeping her head down as she navigated through groups of chattering students who seemed to know exactly where they belonged. "Look what we have here," a voice called out from behind her. Sarah didn't turn around, continuing her steady pace toward the administration building. She had expected this. It always started the same way. "Hey, I'm talking to you," the voice persisted. Closer now. Sarah could hear multiple footsteps following her, and she mentally counted at least 4 distinct gates. When she finally stopped and turned around, she found herself facing a group of 5 male cadets, all significantly larger than her. The one who had been calling out stood in the center, his chest puffed out with the kind of arrogance that came from too much privilege and too little real experience. "I'm Marcus Webb," he announced, as if his name should mean something to her. "My father is Admiral Webb. Maybe you've heard of him?" His cronies snickered behind him, forming a loose semicircle that effectively blocked her path. "I was just wondering what a little girl like you is doing here." "This isn't summer camp, sweetheart." Sarah studied each face carefully, noting their positions, their body language, the way they shifted their weight. Marcus was clearly the leader, standing with his hands on his hips and a smirk that suggested he was used to getting his way. To his left stood a bulky redhead who kept cracking his knuckles, probably the muscle of the group. The other 3 looked like followers, constantly glancing at Marcus for approval. "I'm here for the same reason you are," Sarah replied quietly, her voice steady despite the situation. "To train as a naval officer." Unquote. This response seemed to amuse Marcus greatly. He threw his head back and laughed, a sound that was meant to be intimidating but came across as forced. "Oh, that's rich. You think you can handle what we do here? Look at you. I bet you can't even do 10 push-ups. Probably can't swim either," added the redhead, his voice gravelly from what sounded like years of smoking. "Daddy probably pulled some strings to get her in here." Sarah remained silent, watching as more cadets began to gather around them. Word was spreading quickly that there was some kind of confrontation happening, and nothing drew a crowd like the promise of entertainment. She could see cadets emerging from dormitory windows, others changing direction to get a better view. The academy had its own social hierarchy, and public humiliation was often used to establish dominance early in the training process. "Tell you what," Marcus continued, clearly enjoying the attention he was receiving. "How about we settle this right here? You think you belong here with us? Prove it. Let's see what you've got in a little sparring session. Nothing too rough, just enough to show everyone what happens when little girls try to play soldier." The crowd was growing larger now, and Sarah could hear whispers and murmurs as cadets speculated about what was happening. Some looked concerned, others excited, and a few seemed genuinely interested in seeing how this would play out. She noticed several female cadets in the crowd, their expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity. They probably expected her to back down, to find some excuse to avoid the confrontation. "I don't think that's necessary," Sarah said, taking a step back. The movement wasn't born of fear, but rather calculation. She was assessing escape routes, noting the positions of potential allies and threats, and buying herself time to think. "We're all here to serve our country. There's no need for conflict." Marcus interpreted her movement as weakness, and his grin widened. "Oh, come on now. Don't be shy. I promise I'll go easy on you. Maybe just a little wrestling match? Or are you afraid you might break a nail?" His followers laughed on cue, and several members of the crowd joined in. Sarah could feel the momentum building against her. In situations like this, backing down often only made things worse. The harassment would continue, possibly escalate, and she would spend the rest of her time at the academy dealing with the consequences of being perceived as weak. She also knew that revealing her true capabilities too early would create different problems. The whole point of being here was to blend in, to complete her mission without drawing attention to herself. But Marcus and his friends were making that increasingly difficult. "I'll tell you what," she said finally, her voice carrying a note of resignation that was entirely manufactured. "If it will settle this, I'll accept your challenge. But let's make it fair. Just you and me. No interference from your friends." Marcus looked surprised for a moment, as if he hadn't expected her to agree. He quickly recovered, puffing out his chest even more. "You heard her, guys. She wants to dance. Fine by me. But don't come crying when you get hurt." The crowd pressed closer, forming a rough circle around them. Someone had apparently spread the word to other parts of the academy, because Sarah could see more cadets running toward them from various directions. Even some instructors appeared to be watching from the windows of nearby buildings, though none seemed inclined to intervene. Sarah removed her backpack slowly, placing it carefully on the ground beside her. She rolled her shoulders and stretched her neck, movements that appeared to be nervous preparation but were actually her way of loosening up muscles that had been deliberately kept relaxed. She had learned long ago that appearing weak often provided significant tactical advantages. Marcus was already rolling up his sleeves, making a show of preparing for what he clearly expected to be an easy victory. At 6 feet 2 inches and probably close to 200 pounds, he had significant physical advantages over Sarah's 5'4" frame. He had probably wrestled in high school, maybe even college, and was used to using his size to intimidate opponents. "Last chance to back out," he called to her, loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. "I'd hate for your first day here to also be your last." Sarah stepped into the center of the circle, her movements seeming almost reluctant. She kept her hands at her sides, her posture appearing defensive and uncertain. To the watching crowd, she looked like someone who was about to be thoroughly outmatched. "Whenever you're ready," she said quietly. Marcus didn't hesitate. He lunged forward with the confidence of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation with a woman. His plan was probably to grab her quickly, maybe pin her to the ground, and then bask in the easy victory. It was a simple strategy that had probably worked for him many times before. What happened next would be talked about at the Naval Academy for years to come. Marcus reached for Sarah's shoulders, expecting to easily overpower her smaller frame. Instead, she moved with a fluid precision that seemed to defy physics. In one smooth motion, she stepped aside, grabbed his extended wrist, and used his own momentum against him. Marcus found himself flying through the air before crashing hard onto the concrete ground. The crowd went completely silent. Marcus lay on the ground, staring up at the sky with a confused expression, trying to figure out what had just happened. Sarah stood exactly where she had been, her hands back at her sides, looking as calm and composed as if nothing had occurred. "What the hell?" Marcus gasped, struggling to get back to his feet. His right shoulder was clearly causing him pain, and there was a scrape on his cheek where he had hit the ground. "How did you do that?" Sarah didn't answer. She was watching the crowd's reaction, noting how quickly the dynamics had shifted. Where there had been amusement and anticipation before, there was now uncertainty and confusion. Several cadets were whispering to each other, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Marcus was back on his feet now, his face red with embarrassment and anger. The easy victory he had expected had turned into public humiliation, and he clearly wasn't handling it well. "That was just luck," he declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's go again. I think we're done here," Sarah said, reaching for her backpack. "You wanted to see if I belonged here. I think you have your answer." But Marcus wasn't finished. His pride had been wounded in front of dozens of his peers, and he couldn't let it stand. He rushed at her again, this time with less strategy and more raw anger. Sarah sighed softly, almost imperceptibly, before moving again. This time, she didn't just throw him. She caught his charging form, redirected his energy, and sent him tumbling into two of his followers who had been standing too close. All three ended up in a tangled heap on the ground, with Marcus at the bottom. The redhead who had been making comments about her swimming ability took a step back, his hands raised in front of him. Okay, he said quickly. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot here." Sarah picked up her backpack and slung it over her shoulder. She looked around the circle of watching cadets, making eye contact with several of them. The whispers were getting louder now, and she could hear fragments of speculation about who she really was and where she had learned to fight like that. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the training ground. "I'm here to serve my country. Just like all of you. I hope we can focus on that instead of whatever this was supposed to be." She started walking toward the administration building again. But Marcus wasn't finished. Despite being helped to his feet by his friends, despite the obvious pain in his shoulder and the dirt on his uniform, he couldn't let her have the last word. "This isn't over," he called after her. "I don't know what kind of tricks you learned, but this isn't some dojo. This is the real world. You think you're tough? We'll see how tough you really are." Sarah paused, turning back to face him one more time. For just a moment, something flickered across her features. Something that made several members of the crowd take an involuntary step backward. It was gone so quickly that most people weren't sure they had seen it, but those who did would remember it later. "I hope it doesn't come to that," she said simply. Then she continued walking, leaving Marcus and his friends to deal with their bruised egos and the growing crowd of curious onlookers. As she disappeared into the administration building, the buzz of conversation exploded behind her. Everyone had questions, theories, and opinions about what they had just witnessed. Some cadets were already pulling out their phones, trying to find information about Sarah Martinez. Others were approaching Marcus and his group, eager to hear their version of events. Inside the building, Sarah made her way to the registration desk, where a stern-looking woman in naval uniform was processing paperwork for new arrivals. The woman looked up as Sarah approached, and her expression suggested she had been watching the events outside through the window. "Sarah Martinez reporting for duty," Sarah said, handing over her orders and identification. The woman studied the paperwork carefully, her eyes lingering on certain sections that were heavily redacted or marked with security classifications. When she looked back up at Sarah, her expression had changed subtly. There was a new level of respect there, mixed with curiosity and perhaps a touch of wariness. "Welcome to the Naval Academy, Cadet Martinez," she said formally. "Your room assignment is in Building C, 3rd floor. Your schedule and additional instructions are in this packet. I trust you'll find your time here." Educational. Sarah accepted the packet and headed toward the dormitory buildings. Behind her, through the windows, she could see that the crowd outside was still buzzing with activity. Marcus was being helped toward what looked like the medical facility, his friends clustering around him and gesturing animatedly as they recounted what had happened. She knew this was just the beginning. Word would spread quickly through the Academy's social networks. There would be questions, investigations, and probably more challenges from cadets who felt the need to test themselves against her. Her carefully planned approach of blending in and staying under the radar had been compromised before she had even officially begun her training. As she climbed the stairs toward her assigned room, Sarah reflected on the mission that had brought her here. The intelligence was specific. There was a security breach at the Naval Academy. Someone passing classified information to foreign agents. Her job was to identify the source and neutralize the threat, all while maintaining her cover as a regular cadet. The timing was critical because the information being leaked could compromise ongoing operations and put American servicemen and women at risk around the world. She had spent months preparing for this assignment, studying Academy protocols, memorizing cadet schedules, and developing her cover identity. Sarah Martinez was supposed to be an unremarkable young woman from a middle-class family in Ohio, someone who had earned her way into the Academy through good grades and determination, rather than special connections or exceptional abilities. But Marcus Webb and his friends had forced her hand. Now she would have to adapt her strategy, find new ways to blend in while dealing with the increased attention her demonstration had generated. The mission was too important to abandon, but it had just become significantly more complicated. As she reached her floor, Sarah could hear voices echoing from the stairwells below. Other cadets were arriving, probably coming to get a look at the girl who had embarrassed Marcus Webb in front of half the Academy. She would need to be ready for more confrontations, more tests, and more opportunities for her cover to be blown. Opening the door to her room, Sarah found herself face to face with her roommate, a tall blonde girl who was unpacking what appeared to be enough clothes for a small boutique. The girl looked up as Sarah entered, and her expression immediately brightened with recognition. "Oh my God, you're her. You're the one who just threw Marcus Webb around like he was a rag doll. I'm Jennifer Thompson, but everyone calls me Jen. I cannot believe what I just saw out there. Where did you learn to fight like that?" Sarah set her backpack down carefully, already formulating her response. The questions were starting. Just as she had expected, how she answered them would determine whether her mission could continue or whether she would need to find an entirely different approach to uncovering the Academy's security leak. Sarah chose her words carefully as she faced her new roommate's eager questions. "I took some self-defense classes back home," she said, unpacking her own belongings with deliberate slowness. "My dad was worried about me going to college alone, so he insisted I learn how to protect myself." Jen nodded enthusiastically, clearly buying the explanation. "Well, it definitely worked. Marcus has been terrorizing people here since day one. His father being an admiral makes him think he can get away with anything. You should have seen his face when he hit the ground. Priceless." Resourced. As they continued unpacking, Jen filled Sarah in on the social dynamics of the Academy. Marcus Webb wasn't just a bully. He was part of an exclusive group of cadets whose families had deep military connections. They called themselves the Legacy Circle, and they had been making life difficult for anyone they considered beneath their status. Most cadets either joined their group or tried to stay out of their way. "The weird thing is," Jen continued, folding a designer sweater with practiced precision, "they usually pick on guys who they think might challenge them later. I've never seen them go after a girl like that. It was like Marcus was specifically targeting you for some reason." Sarah filed this information away while maintaining her casual demeanor. If Marcus had been targeting her specifically, it suggested that someone might already suspect her true identity. The Academy's security breach could involve people with access to classified personnel files, which would explain how they might know about her background. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into Academy life with the enthusiasm of a genuine cadet. She attended classes, participated in drills, and gradually began building relationships with her fellow students. Her performance was carefully calibrated to be good enough to avoid attention but not so exceptional as to raise questions. She scored well on written exams, completed physical training requirements without standing out, and generally blended into the middle of her class rankings. But the incident with Marcus had created ripple effects that she couldn't entirely control. Other cadets approached her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Some wanted to be her friend, hoping to benefit from her apparent ability to stand up to the Legacy Circle. Others seemed wary, unsure what to make of someone who could so easily handle a larger opponent. Marcus himself had been notably absent since their confrontation. According to Jen and other sources of Academy gossip, he had suffered a separated shoulder and was undergoing medical evaluation. His friends in the Legacy Circle were keeping a low profile as well, apparently unsure how to proceed without their leader. Sarah used this breathing room to begin her real work. During her free periods, she explored the Academy's facilities, mapping out security protocols and identifying potential vulnerabilities. She paid particular attention to areas where classified materials might be stored or transmitted, noting guard schedules, camera placements, and access controls. The Academy's computer lab became a regular stop on her reconnaissance route. Officially, she was there to complete research assignments for her courses. In reality, she was studying the network architecture and looking for signs of unauthorized access or data transmission. Her background in information security made it relatively easy to spot potential weaknesses, though she was careful not to attempt any actual intrusion that might trigger security alerts. It was during one of these sessions that she first noticed Lieutenant Commander Jessica Park. The instructor was supervising a computer programming class, but Sarah observed her paying unusual attention to certain students. Park would linger near specific workstations, sometimes glancing at screens when she thought no one was looking. Her behavior suggested she was monitoring something beyond normal class activities. Sarah began discreetly following Park's movements around the Academy. The lieutenant commander had legitimate reasons to access most areas of the facility, but her patterns seemed odd. She often stayed late in her office, sometimes until well past midnight. She made frequent trips to the communications center, always carrying a secure briefcase. Most tellingly, she had been seen leaving the academy grounds at irregular hours, often heading toward a part of town that had no obvious connection to her duties. While conducting this surveillance, Sarah encountered her first real test since the Marcus incident. She was following Park one evening when she found herself face-to-face with 3 members of the Legacy Circle. They had been waiting for her in a maintenance corridor, far from any area where other cadets or instructors might interrupt. "Well, well," said the redhead she remembered from her first day. His name was Connor Walsh, and he had apparently appointed himself as Marcus's temporary replacement. "Look what we have here." Little Miss Martial Arts, all alone in a dark hallway. The other 2 were cadets she didn't recognize, but their positions and body language suggested they were there for more than conversation. They had spread out to block her retreat routes, and one of them was flexing his hands in a way that suggested he was wearing weighted gloves under his sleeves. "I don't want any trouble," Sarah said, maintaining the same quiet tone she had used with Marcus. "I'm just heading back to my room." "See, that's the problem," Connor replied, taking a step closer. "You caused a lot of trouble for our friend Marcus. His shoulders still messed up, and his pride. Well, that's going to take a lot longer to heal. We think you owe him an apology." Sarah quickly assessed her options. The corridor was narrow, which limited her movement, but also meant her attackers couldn't surround her as effectively as they might want. There were fire extinguishers and emergency equipment mounted on the walls that could serve as weapons if necessary. Most importantly, she could hear footsteps echoing from the main hallway, suggesting that other people were moving around the building. "I think Marcus got exactly what he was looking for," she said calmly. "If he wants to discuss it further, he knows where to find me." This response seemed to anger Connor, whose face flushed red in the dim lighting. "You think you're pretty tough, don't you? Let's see how tough you are when the odds are a little more even." He nodded to his companions, who began moving toward her. Sarah could see that they had learned from Marcus's mistake. Instead of charging in recklessly, they were advancing slowly and carefully, trying to coordinate their approach. They probably expected her to panic or try to run. Instead, Sarah did something that caught them completely off guard. She sat down on the floor. The 3 cadets stopped moving, confusion replacing aggression on their faces. They had been prepared for resistance, possibly even for her to use whatever martial arts techniques had defeated Marcus. They had not been prepared for passive resistance. "What are you doing?" Connor demanded, his voice uncertain. "I'm making a choice," Sarah replied, sitting cross-legged in the middle of the corridor. "You want to beat me up? Go ahead, but you'll have to explain to the academy administration why 3 grown men attacked a girl who was sitting on the floor doing nothing threatening." The footsteps in the main hallway were getting closer, and Sarah could hear voices accompanying them. Connor and his friends exchanged worried glances. Assaulting someone who was actively fighting back could potentially be explained as a training accident or a mutual confrontation. Attacking someone who was sitting peacefully would be much harder to justify. "Get up," Connor hissed, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Stand up and fight." "No," Sarah said simply. "If you want to hit me, you'll have to do it while I'm sitting here defensively, and you'll have to explain that decision to whoever comes around that corner in about 30 seconds. The voices were indeed getting closer, and one of them sounded like an instructor. Connor made a frustrated gesture to his companions, and they reluctantly began backing away. As they retreated, Connor pointed a finger at Sarah. "This isn't over," he said, echoing Marcus's earlier threat. "You can't sit on the floor forever." Sarah remained seated until the 3 cadets had disappeared around the corner. Only then did she stand up and dust herself off, arriving at the main hallway just as Lieutenant Commander Park appeared with 2 other instructors. They were discussing some technical issue related to the communications equipment, and none of them paid any attention to Sarah as she headed back toward the dormitories. The encounter had provided useful information beyond just the confirmation that the Legacy Circle wasn't finished with her. She had noticed that one of the cadets with Connor was wearing a watch that looked far more expensive than anything a typical student could afford. More importantly, she had overheard part of their conversation before they had confronted her. They had been discussing someone called the Professor, who apparently had plans for dealing with her. Sarah spent the next several days investigating this new lead while maintaining her normal routine. The professor could be a nickname for any number of academy instructors, but she gradually narrowed down the possibilities by observing which faculty members had unusual interactions with the Legacy Circle cadets. Her investigation was interrupted by an unexpected development. During a routine training exercise, she found herself partnered with a cadet named David Chen, who seemed unusually interested in her background. Unlike most of her classmates, who were satisfied with her story about self-defense classes, David asked probing questions about her hometown, her family, and her reasons for joining the Navy. "I looked up your high school records," he said casually during a break between exercises. "Your school doesn't have any martial arts programs. Neither does your hometown. So where exactly did you learn to fight like that?" Sarah studied David carefully. He was obviously intelligent, probably near the top of their class academically. But his questioning suggested more than casual curiosity. His approach was systematic, almost like an interrogation. She began to wonder if he was connected to the security investigation from the other direction. "I had private lessons," she replied, sticking to her cover story. "There was a retired Marine in my neighborhood who taught classes in his garage. Nothing official." David nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "That's interesting. What was his name?" "I might know him. The Marine community is pretty tight-knit." This was dangerous territory. Creating fictional details about her cover story risked inconsistencies that could be checked. But being evasive might be even more suspicious. Sarah was saved from having to respond by the arrival of their drill instructor, who barked orders for the exercise to resume. That evening, Sarah decided to take a more direct approach to her investigation. Instead of following Lieutenant Commander Park, she waited until the officer was alone in her office and knocked on the door. "Cadet Martinez," Park said, looking up from her desk with surprise. "What can I do for you?" "I was hoping to discuss my computer programming assignment," Sarah said, stepping into the office. "I'm having some trouble with the network protocols section." Park gestured to a chair across from her desk, but Sarah remained standing, using the opportunity to scan the office. She noted several items that seemed out of place. A high-end laptop that wasn't standard academy issue. A secure phone that appeared to be encrypted beyond normal military specifications, and a photograph on the desk that showed Park with several people in civilian clothes at what looked like an expensive restaurant. "The network protocols can be challenging," Park said, apparently not noticing Sarah's examination of her office. "What specifically are you having trouble with?" As they discussed the technical details, Sarah carefully steered the conversation toward security issues. She mentioned concerns about data protection and asked questions about how the Academy prevented unauthorized access to its systems. Park's responses were technically competent, but seemed evasive when Sarah pressed for specifics about security measures. "You seem very interested in cybersecurity," Park observed after several minutes of discussion. "Are you considering it as a specialty?" I think it's important," Sarah replied. "With all the threats facing our country, we need people who understand how to protect our information." Park's expression shifted subtly, and Sarah caught a flicker of something that might have been approval or recognition. "You're absolutely right. Information security is critical to national defense. Perhaps you'd be interested in some additional reading on the subject? I have some materials that might help with your assignment." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a flash drive. "This contains some case studies and examples that should clarify the concepts you're struggling with. Just make sure to return it when you're finished." Sarah accepted the flash drive, though every instinct told her it was more than just educational materials. Park's behavior had changed during their conversation, becoming more animated and engaged when they discussed security threats. The timing of the offer, combined with the expensive equipment in her office, suggested this might be some kind of test or recruitment attempt. Back in her room, Sarah examined the flash drive using a laptop she had modified with additional security software. Her suspicions proved correct. While the drive did contain educational materials about network security, it also included hidden files that appeared to be surveillance software. Installing the programs would have given someone remote access to her computer and potentially to the Academy's network through her student account. This discovery confirmed that Lieutenant Commander Park was involved in the security breach, but it also raised new questions. Was Park the primary source of leaked information, or was she trying to recruit additional assets? The sophisticated nature of the surveillance software suggested she had access to resources beyond what would be available to a single Academy instructor. Sarah spent the rest of the night carefully analyzing the software and documenting her findings. She was so focused on her work that she almost missed the soft sound of her door handle turning. Someone was trying to enter her room. She quickly shut down her laptop and slipped the flash drive into a hiding place she had prepared for sensitive materials. By the time the door opened, she was lying in her bed, apparently asleep. Through half-closed eyes, she watched as a figure in dark clothing entered the room and moved toward her desk. The intruder was systematic, searching through her belongings with practiced efficiency. They found nothing of interest among her class materials and personal items, which was exactly what Sarah had intended. All of her real investigative work was hidden in places that would require a much more thorough search to discover. After several minutes, the intruder moved toward Jen's side of the room. Sarah's roommate was genuinely asleep, breathing deeply and oblivious to what was happening just a few feet away. The searcher spent even less time on Jen's belongings, confirming that Sarah was the primary target. Before leaving, the intruder paused near Sarah's bed. She could sense them watching her, probably trying to determine whether she was truly asleep. She maintained her breathing rhythm and kept her muscles relaxed, giving no indication that she was aware of their presence. Only after the door closed softly behind them did Sarah allow herself to relax. The search confirmed that someone suspected her true identity, but it also suggested they weren't certain. A more aggressive approach would have involved direct confrontation or simply having her removed from the Academy on some pretext. The next morning brought another complication. Sarah arrived at breakfast to find the dining hall buzzing with news. Marcus Webb had returned to active duty, and he was apparently planning something special to celebrate his recovery. According to the rumors, he had spent his time away from training developing a comprehensive plan to deal with problem cadets who didn't understand Academy hierarchy. Jen filled Sarah in on the details as they ate. He's been meeting with his father and some other high-ranking officers. Word is they're planning some kind of special training exercise that will give him a chance to prove himself. And everyone knows who he's really targeting. Sarah nodded, though her attention was divided between Marcus's plans and her continued observation of the dining hall. She had noticed that David Chen was sitting with several cadets she didn't recognize, and their conversation seemed unusually intense for breakfast discussion. One of them kept glancing in her direction, and she began to wonder if David's questioning the previous day had been part of a larger investigation. Her concerns were confirmed when Lieutenant Commander Park approached their table. The instructor's demeanor was friendly, but Sarah could see tension in her posture. "Cadet Martinez, I hope the materials I gave you were helpful," Park said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "I'd like to discuss your progress on the assignment. Could you stop by my office after morning classes?" "Of course, ma'am," Sarah replied, though she knew the meeting would be about much more than computer programming. Park's public approach was designed to seem routine, but it was also a way of establishing a paper trail for their interactions. As Park walked away, Sarah noticed that David Chen had been watching the entire exchange. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, but not before she caught an expression of recognition on his face. David knew something about Park's real activities, and he was trying to determine Sarah's level of involvement. The web of suspicion and surveillance at the Academy was more complex than Sarah had initially realized. She was investigating Park. Park was testing her. David was investigating both of them. And Marcus was planning some kind of revenge that could complicate everything. Meanwhile, the real security breach was continuing, with classified information potentially flowing to foreign agents while everyone focused on their personal conflicts and suspicions. Sarah finished her breakfast and prepared for what promised to be a challenging day. Her meeting with Park would require careful navigation to avoid revealing her true mission, while potentially learning more about the lieutenant commander's activities. She would also need to figure out David's role in the situation and determine whether he was friend, foe, or simply an overly curious cadet who had stumbled onto something dangerous. Most importantly, she would need to prepare for whatever Marcus had planned. His father's involvement suggested that the coming confrontation would be official rather than the informal harassment she had dealt with so far. That could provide opportunities to expose the Academy's security issues, but it also meant the stakes were much higher. As she left the dining hall, Sarah reflected on how quickly her simple infiltration mission had become a complex web of competing interests and hidden agendas. The Academy's security breach was real, but it was occurring within an environment where personal vendettas, family connections, and institutional politics created multiple layers of deception and misdirection. Sarah's meeting with Lieutenant Commander Park that afternoon proved to be a carefully orchestrated dance of half-truths and hidden meanings. Park's office had been rearranged since her previous visit, with the suspicious laptop and encrypted phone nowhere to be seen. The photograph on the desk had also been replaced with a standard Academy promotional image. "I trust the materials on the flash drive were enlightening," Park began, her tone neutral but her eyes watchful. "Did you find the case studies relevant to your current situation?" "Very educational," Sarah replied, matching the instructor's careful tone. The examples of information-gathering techniques were particularly detailed. "I was impressed by the sophistication of the surveillance methods described." Park's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed a slight tension in her shoulders. They were communicating on multiple levels now, each testing the other's knowledge and intentions without stating anything explicitly. "Surveillance is indeed a complex field," Park continued. "It requires patience, careful observation, and the ability to distinguish between genuine threats and false positives. Sometimes people see patterns that aren't really there." Sarah understood the warning embedded in Park's words. The lieutenant commander was suggesting that Sarah might be imagining threats or misinterpreting innocent activities, but the very fact that Park felt compelled to issue such a warning confirmed Sarah's suspicions about her involvement in the security breach. "I appreciate the advice," Sarah said, "though I've found that thorough investigation usually reveals the truth, even when the initial evidence seems contradictory." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. David Chen entered, looking slightly out of breath as if he had been running. His arrival seemed to surprise Park, who quickly composed her expression into one of professional neutrality. "Cadet Chen," Park said, "I wasn't expecting you. Is there something you need?" David glanced between Park and Sarah, his expression unreadable. "I apologize for the interruption, ma'am. I was looking for Cadet Martinez. There's been a development regarding tomorrow's special training exercise." Sarah felt a chill of anticipation. Marcus's planned revenge was apparently moving forward faster than expected. But David's timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental. He had either been watching Park's office or had inside information about their meeting. "What kind of development?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The exercise has been modified," David explained, his words careful and measured. "It's now classified as a combat readiness assessment. All participants will be evaluated on their ability to handle unexpected threats and hostile situations. Admiral Webb will be personally overseeing the evaluation." Park's reaction to this news was subtle but telling. Sarah caught a brief flash of concern cross her features before she regained her composure. The instructor clearly hadn't been expecting this development, which suggested her involvement in Academy activities wasn't as comprehensive as Sarah had assumed. "That sounds like valuable training," Park said, though her tone lacked conviction. "I'm sure all cadets will benefit from the experience," David nodded, but his attention remained focused on Sarah. "The exercise begins at 0600 tomorrow. Full combat gear is required. Cadet Martinez, you might want to prepare for scenarios involving multiple opponents and unconventional tactics." After David left, Park's demeanor became noticeably more tense. She stood up from behind her desk and moved to the window, looking out at the Academy grounds where cadets were conducting their afternoon training exercises. "Cadet Martinez," she said without turning around, "I want you to understand something. The Academy can be a dangerous place for those who attract the wrong kind of attention. Sometimes, the best strategy is to avoid conflicts rather than win them." Sarah studied Park's reflection in the window glass. The lieutenant commander's warning seemed genuine, but it also confirmed that she knew more about the situation than she was admitting. The question was whether Park was trying to protect Sarah from Marcus's revenge or prevent her from uncovering something more significant. "I appreciate your concern," Sarah replied, "but I've always believed that backing down from bullies only encourages them to escalate their behavior." Park turned around, her expression serious. "This goes beyond typical academy hazing, Sarah. There are forces at work here that you don't understand. Marcus Webb isn't just acting on his own injured pride. His father has significant influence, and there are people who would be very happy to see certain cadets fail or disappear entirely." The use of Sarah's first name was significant, suggesting a shift from their formal instructor-student relationship to something more personal. Park was either genuinely trying to help her or attempting to manipulate her into a specific course of action. "Are you saying I should drop out of the academy?" Sarah asked directly. "I'm saying you should be very careful about who you trust and what you reveal about yourself," Park replied. "Tomorrow's exercise isn't really about training. It's about elimination." Sarah left the meeting with more questions than answers. Park's warnings could be an attempt to protect her from a legitimate threat, but they could also be a way of scaring her away from further investigation. The lieutenant commander's knowledge of the exercise details suggested she had inside information about Admiral Webb's plans, which raised questions about her connections within the Academy's power structure. That evening, Sarah conducted a thorough reconnaissance of the area where the next day's exercise would take place. The training ground was a complex of buildings and obstacle courses designed to simulate urban combat scenarios. She identified potential escape routes, defensive positions, and areas where surveillance equipment might be hidden. More importantly, she discovered evidence that the exercise had been specifically designed to isolate certain participants from potential witnesses or assistants. The designated training area was farther from the main academy buildings than usual, and the schedule had been arranged so that most other cadets would be in classes during the exercise. While conducting her survey, Sarah encountered an unexpected ally. She found Jennifer Wilson, a senior cadet she had met briefly during orientation, examining the same training area with obvious professional interest. "Cadet Martinez," Jennifer said, approaching with a confident stride. "I heard about tomorrow's exercise. Interesting timing, don't you think?" Sarah studied Jennifer carefully. The senior cadet had a reputation for excellence in combat training and tactical analysis. More importantly, she had been asking questions about the Legacy Circle's activities and their connections to Academy administration. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked cautiously. Jennifer gestured toward the training area. "Combat readiness assessments are usually conducted during regular training periods with standard supervision. This one is scheduled for dawn, in an isolated area, with non-standard evaluation criteria. Either someone is planning something very specific, or they're trying to avoid oversight." The senior cadet's analysis aligned perfectly with Sarah's own assessment. But Jennifer's willingness to discuss her concerns openly suggested she might have her own agenda for being involved. "Do you think there's something wrong with the exercise?" Sarah asked. "I think Marcus Webb and his friends have convinced his father to create an opportunity for payback," Jennifer replied bluntly. "What I can't figure out is why you're their target. Most Legacy Circle harassment is about establishing dominance. This feels personal." Well, Sarah appreciated Jennifer's directness, but she couldn't reveal the real reason for the attention she was receiving. Instead, she stuck to the obvious explanation. "Marcus didn't like being embarrassed in front of the other cadets," she said. "Some people don't handle public failure very well." Jennifer nodded, but her expression suggested she suspected there was more to the situation. "Well, whatever the reason, you should know that tomorrow's exercise isn't going to be fair. The Legacy Circle has been preparing for weeks. They've studied your fighting style, developed counter-strategies, and probably arranged for additional advantages." This information confirmed Sarah's worst fears about the exercise. If Marcus and his allies had been planning their approach for weeks, they had access to resources and intelligence that went far beyond what typical cadets could obtain. Someone with significant authority was helping them prepare. "What would you do in my situation?" Sarah asked, curious about Jennifer's tactical assessment. I'd consider not showing up, Jennifer replied immediately. Report a medical emergency, family crisis, anything to avoid walking into an obvious trap. But I'm guessing that's not really an option for you. Sarah shook her head. Failing to appear for the exercise would raise questions about her commitment and could provide grounds for disciplinary action or dismissal from the academy. More importantly, it would prevent her from gathering intelligence about the people involved in the conspiracy against her. In that case, Jennifer continued, I'd recommend changing the game entirely. They're expecting you to fight their fight on their terms. Don't give them that satisfaction. The senior cadet's advice echoed Sarah's own tactical thinking. The key to surviving tomorrow's exercise would be refusing to engage with Marcus's plans on his terms, but that would require a deeper understanding of what he was actually trying to accomplish. Sarah spent the rest of the evening analyzing everything she had learned about the academy's social dynamics and security issues. The pattern that emerged suggested the two problems were more connected than she had initially realized. The Legacy Circle's harassment wasn't just about personal vendettas. It was part of a larger system designed to control information and eliminate potential threats to established power structures. Lieutenant Commander Park's warnings, David Chen's investigations, and Marcus Webb's planned revenge were all pieces of a complex puzzle involving foreign intelligence operations, family loyalties, and institutional corruption. Sarah's mission to identify a security leak had evolved into something much more dangerous and significant. At 0530 the next morning, Sarah reported to the designated training area in full combat gear. She arrived early to observe the setup and noted several concerning details immediately. The exercise supervisors included Admiral Webb and two other high-ranking officers she didn't recognize. More troubling, there were several civilians present who appeared to be observing the proceedings rather than participating in academy business. Marcus was there with his usual group of supporters, but Sarah noticed they had been joined by additional cadets she hadn't seen before. These newcomers were older, more experienced, and moved with the confidence of people who had seen actual combat. They weren't academy students. They were professionals brought in specifically for this exercise. David Chen arrived just before the official start time, taking a position near the observers rather than with the participants. His presence confirmed Sarah's suspicion that he was involved in the situation as more than just a curious fellow cadet. Today's exercise will test your ability to handle asymmetric threats and unconventional combat scenarios, Admiral Webb announced to the assembled group. You will be divided into teams and given specific objectives to complete under hostile conditions. Performance will be evaluated based on tactical effectiveness, adaptability, and results achieved. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with 3 other cadets she barely knew, while Marcus led a team that included most of his Legacy Circle supporters, plus 2 of the professional outsiders. The objective assignments made the exercise's true purpose clear. Sarah's team was tasked with defending a position against multiple attacking forces, while Marcus's team was responsible for eliminating all defenders. The training area had been modified overnight with additional obstacles and blind spots that would make defensive positioning more difficult. Someone had clearly spent considerable time and resources preparing for this specific scenario. As the exercise began, Sarah quickly realized that her teammates had not been randomly selected. They were all cadets who had previously challenged the Legacy Circle's authority or asked inconvenient questions about academy policies. This wasn't just about punishing her. It was about removing several potential troublemakers in a single operation. The attacking forces moved with coordination that went far beyond typical academy training exercises. They used advanced tactics, sophisticated equipment, and demonstrated knowledge of the defensive positions that suggested extensive preparation and inside information. Sarah's teammates fought bravely, but they were clearly outmatched. Within 30 minutes, 2 of them had been eliminated from the exercise, leaving Sarah and 1 other cadet to defend their position against overwhelming odds. It was at this moment that Sarah made a crucial decision. She had spent weeks maintaining her cover, carefully hiding her true capabilities to avoid suspicion. But the exercise had progressed beyond simple harassment into something that resembled an actual assassination attempt. The professional attackers were using live ammunition in their training weapons, and the safety protocols that normally governed academy exercises had been quietly suspended. When Marcus and his team launched their final assault on her position, Sarah stopped pretending to be an ordinary cadet. She moved with the fluid precision of someone trained in advanced combat techniques, using skills that went far beyond anything taught at the Naval Academy. Her counterattack was so swift and effective that it caught the attacking force completely off guard. Marcus found himself disarmed and on the ground before he realized what had happened. The professional soldiers who had been brought in to ensure his success suddenly faced an opponent whose abilities exceeded their own. Within minutes, Sarah had neutralized the entire attacking force and secured the training area. The sudden reversal brought the exercise to an immediate halt. Admiral Webb and his civilian observers rushed onto the field, their expressions ranging from shock to outright alarm. They had expected to witness the elimination of a problem cadet. Instead, they had seen her demonstrate capabilities that raised serious questions about who she really was. "Exercise terminated," Admiral Webb announced, his voice tight with controlled anger. "All participants report for debriefing immediately." As the various teams regrouped, Sarah noticed significant tension among the observers. The civilians were engaged in heated discussion with Academy officials, and several people were making urgent phone calls. David Chen approached her with an expression of newfound respect mixed with wariness. "That was quite a performance," he said quietly. "I don't think anyone was expecting that level of skill from a first-year cadet." "There." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes people are more than they appear to be." David nodded slowly. "Yes, they are. The question is whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in this situation." Before Sarah could respond, Lieutenant Commander Park appeared at her side. The instructor's demeanor had changed dramatically since their previous conversations. There was no pretense of casual academic discussion now. "Cadet Martinez," Park said formally, "Admiral Webb would like to speak with you privately. I think it's time for some honest conversations about why you're really here." As they walked toward the Academy's administrative building, Sarah reflected on the morning's events. Her cover was blown, but the exercise had revealed important information about the scope of the conspiracy she was investigating. The involvement of civilian observers, professional soldiers, and high-ranking military officials suggested that the Academy's security breach was part of a much larger operation. The question now was whether she could use her exposed position to complete her mission, or whether she would need to call for extraction before the situation became even more dangerous. Either way, the careful game of deception and surveillance that had characterized her first weeks at the Academy was over. Whatever came next would require a completely different approach. In Admiral Webb's office, Sarah found herself facing not just the Academy's leadership but also representatives from naval intelligence and what appeared to be other government agencies. The meeting that followed would determine whether her mission could continue and whether the Academy's security breach could be resolved without causing a scandal that would damage the institution's reputation. As she took a seat across from Admiral Webb, Sarah realized that her real test was just beginning. Everything that had happened so far had been preparation for this moment when her true identity and mission would finally be revealed to the people she had been investigating. The outcome of this confrontation would determine not just her own fate, but the future security of one of America's most important military institutions. The Admiral's first question cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Agent Martinez, I think it's time you told us exactly who sent you here and what you've discovered during your investigation." Sarah's response would shape everything that happened next, not just for her mission but for the complex web of loyalties, betrayals, and hidden agendas that she had uncovered at the Naval Academy. The moment of truth had finally arrived, and there was no going back to the simple cover identity of an ordinary cadet trying to blend in among her peers.